What Pokemon is the most popular? I mean, at face value, it seems like an obvious question. Pikachu, Charizard, Mewtwo, all the familiar faces that appear in advertisements, on your game boxes, and on your TCG booster packs. That's not proof of anything. These decisions were all made by marketing companies, not the fans. When I first started thinking about the subject of this video, it was a personal curiosity. I heard about a poll on Reddit once, and even though that's exactly the sort of answer I'm looking for, I've got to ask, how comprehensive actually is that data? I mean, no matter how diligently the survey was conducted, there's still so many factors that would influence the results. The very fact that it's in English means the results would be derived from an English-speaking audience, ignoring the obviously significant Japanese fanbase, as well as the still sizable swaths of Pokemon fans, whether they speak Spanish, Korean, or any other language. Also, I don't use Reddit, and I'm willing to bet that Pokemon's substantially young fanbase doesn't either. It's not like that's the poll's fault, or even a problem, but it does tell us something interesting. It tells us about the English-speaking world, about older Pokemon fans, and about the franchise's reach as a whole. I mean, just look at how many responses it got. And besides, the most popular Pokemon will still be in roughly the correct spots, right? Well, the only solutions to these questions can be found in the data. I'm aware I'm only comfortable speaking English and just typing in English to use the search results, meaning what I find still leans westward, but I did do my diligence in trying to find as much information as I could, both from official sources and from fan-hosted channels. Officially, this was when Pokemon of the Year started, an annual award given only to a single special Pokemon who, out of hundreds, or eventually over 1,000 possible entries, rose to the top to be the very best. This began in 2020, with the website still being up to visit if you like. Votes are very conveniently broken down by generation, and though you can't see every Pokemon's ranking, you can see the top 30. This data was collected in collaboration with Google, with votes being taken on Google itself between the dates of February 5th and February 14th. Hey, that's Valentine's Day. I wonder if there's any meaning to that. And I guess the data all had to be done before Pokemon Day. That's still over a week away. Tangent aside, clearly, this was a resounding success, as hundreds of thousands of votes were received. So naturally, in just a year's time, they'd host the... Wait, why is the website for this one down? The other one's older. What gives? Sorry, that's a me problem and not an audience problem. It's time for the Pokemon of the Year contest again, only a bit different. There was no collaboration with Google this time, and instead Pokemon hosted its own dedicated website showing the votes in real time, and all you needed to vote was to use Twitter. And did I forget to mention that this year was in Japan only? Yeah, for some reason just 1 year after the massive success that was the first event, they were scaling back the operation by quite a bit. Actually, now that I think about it, was 2020's Pokemon of the Year English only? Anyway, that's not where this weirdness ends. The actual results were unique, to say the least. Aside from Charizard, the top 10 here don't appear in the top 10 of any other list that we're going to look at today, which makes it pretty different. What caused this difference? Was it the region? The fact it was conducted on Twitter? Some other third thing to make the script sound complete? Who knows? It did receive way less votes overall. That's probably because it's much more cumbersome to get on Twitter and send a tweet containing a hashtag Pokemon than it is to just go on Google. Now you may think it's time to move on to 2022, but I may have deceived you a little bit. You see, 2021 was Japan only, but Pokemon Korea held their own survey to crown a favorite around the same time. The divisions are the same, with a top per region ranking and an overall category. The results are also much more in line with other international surveys, with all of the usual suspects showing up. Mimikyu, Greninja, Charizard, Rayquaza, and in the number 1 spot, Chikorita! And both Mudkip and Marshtomp made the list. I absolutely love standout presences like this, and I definitely didn't say that enough for the Japanese poll, but it really goes to show that every Pokemon's someone's favorite, and some Pokemon that go underappreciated where you live are given their time in the spotlight elsewhere. Polling this time around was done a little differently, as each region was voted for individually and Megas were considered their own Pokemon. The time which you had to vote was also way longer, with Generation 1's voting period starting in January, and the overall categories voting ending in October. I just think it's really neat that this is the only official poll where you vote separately for each list, instead of compiling information from one master poll, though that might mean that people that remember to vote for their Johto favorites in March might not have remembered or even been around for Alola in August. Alright, now we can move on to Pokemon of the Year 2022. Where is it? Not here? Oh, it didn't happen. Well, alright, maybe in 2023 they just... Nope! There hasn't been a single official poll since then, Pokemon of the Year branding or otherwise. I guess it makes some sense, as doing it every year would mean that you'd probably get the same results every time. But it's a little lame that none of these polls include Scarlet and Violet. But it's not like the Pokemon Company is the only entity in the world capable of gathering this data, so why don't we check out some unofficial sources to see if the results line up. Now we get to that Reddit poll that I had mentioned at the start of the video, and that I only sort of knew about. Starting in 2019, during Pokemon's 7th generation, Reddit user MammaMia1001 set out with a goal to test whether every Pokemon is someone's favorite. With a submission period of just a single weekend, the survey received over 52,000 responses, and rather uniquely, the results were focused more on which Pokemon were least appreciated rather than the most. With an average expected vote count of 65 votes per Pokemon, last place was a 4-way tie with 0 votes for all of these poor souls. And they are Silcoon, Gothita, Electric, and Yungoos. Special note to Alomomola being the lowest voted evolution line at just a single vote. Don't feel too bad though, as future surveys and the general underdog principle shows, ranking bottom of these sorts of lists actually gains you popularity. 4 years later in 2023, we got an investigative survey from GuideStrats with a much more unique sampling method. Rather than asking for people to submit their answers in a poll, they analyzed 75,302 profiles of users from Cerebi, taking their listed favorite Pokemon and compiling that data. They did make some interesting choices of how to interpret this information, such as omitting all Pokemon from generations 7, 8, and 9, but considering the results, it feels like their stated reason, a lack of meaningful presence, might have some merit. The top 50 list contains no Gen 6 Pokemon, only one Generation 5 Pokemon, being Zoroark, and everything else is either from Generation 4 or earlier. Cerebi, being a fairly old website and still using the, at this point, retro-feeling forums of yesteryear, it makes sense that its users are all familiar with the early days of Pokemon. And it also wouldn't surprise me if mostly the users haven't updated their profiles since 2012. Charizard was a runaway champion here, but the article makes note that while it won amongst US, UK, and Australian users, Canadians preferred Pikachu. Also, women preferred Eevee, which didn't even make it in the men's top 10 list. I actually really like these insights, as the user data allowed you to draw more interesting conclusions amongst the available demographics. This whole article is an interesting read, and if you'd like to visit this website after watching this video, I have it linked in my description, along with every other survey discussed in this video. In the same year, we have another gaming website taking a shot at cracking the Pokemon popularity case, this time Japan's GameWith. Using a pretty simple voting page on their website, 152,681 votes were collected over a period of a week, though this poll was restricted to just the Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. Additionally, you were allowed to vote for 3 Pokemon and you had to post to Twitter again. Is there something about Japan and Twitter that I just don't get? My confusion aside, the results were posted in the form of a top 100 list and Clodsire made the top 10? Clodsire aside, yeah, the rest of it seems about what I expected, and Chandelure retains its usual popularity within Japan. This next article really bothered me, and I was about to go into a rant about its methodology, about how I disagreed with its conclusions, and how I felt it wasn't really accurate to include it in this video. But while I'm reviewing it for editing, I see that the only 2 listed authors are both children, and though the content of the article makes me believe that they didn't actually pen this, especially with a particularly pointed reference to a poster from the 90s, I can't help but shake the feeling that it's in bad taste to call it out. And I'd hate to discourage these kids from expressing their curiosity, especially when I'm out here doing basically the same thing. So, I'm leaving it out of the video. Instead, I'll point to this video that I found while I was checking over all my sources. It's actually a YouTube video on this very subject. Now, I'm not going to summarize what this poll in particular had because I feel that the views should rightly go to the creator, but once you're done with this video, if you have an itch for more on the subject, feel free to go over to that one. I'll have it linked below, and I'll have it pop up right here. Okay, and it's time to end this section with return to polling. Despite being a very recent newsletter, the Johto Times has made quite a splash in the space. Starting in 2023, they've had interviews with the founders of various Pokemon forums and fan sites, both defunct and ongoing, and it's been promoted on even larger sites like Bulbapedia and Pokécommunity. One of these promotions was to bring awareness to their own Johto Times favorite Pokemon poll. The first stage took place during a little over 2 months, and like the Korean poll, grouped Pokemon into rankings by generation, having an individual voting period per generation. Each person could submit for 6 Pokemon in each generation during this round. After over 500,000 votes, the final round began with only the top 10 from each generation being eligible to vote for, and readers could vote for up to 3. When the results came through, there ended up being 2 4th places due to a tie, which is pretty fun. All in all though, the list correlates pretty strongly with other polling data seen so far. So, the results are in, but who, ultimately, are our top Pokemon? Who's the number 1? Stay tuned, and we'll bring you all the answers and more. We have 3 categories to rank our top contenders: most finalists, most victories, and most overall votes. For our first category, we have the Pokemon that made it into the top 10 on 2 lists, 3 lists, 4 lists, and, with a 3-way tie for first place, 5 out of the 7 top 10 lists we've looked at today. Congratulations to Charizard, Gengar, and Lucario. On to our second category, we have the Pokemon that made first place the most times, and this is, once again, a tie! This time between Charizard and Greninja. Though I do think Greninja deserves a bonus point for making it onto an official poll. And, for our final category, we have the top 10 Pokemon who received the most combined votes. For this category, we'll have a fair ranking and an unfair ranking, as Pikachu did not have any publicly available votes for the Johto Times poll, and Mimikyu was excluded from the Guide Strats survey. In 10th, we have Gengar. Despite making it onto these lists often and winning in the first category, it just barely made the top 10 here. In 9th, we have Rayquaza, always a strong contender, and the only legend to make this list. In 8th, we have Gardevoir. It does seem like a lot of Pokemon who should Mega Evolve make these lists, doesn't it? In 7th, we have Sylveon. Despite being the most recent evolution, it's clearly become a fan favorite. In 6th, we have a departure. Without any known votes in the Johto Times poll, Pikachu loses its position. And in 5th, who knows, maybe if Pikachu's votes were public, it still would have beat out Umbreon in the unfair category. In 4th, Charizard. Winner of the first two categories, it sadly just couldn't make it for the triple finish. In 3rd, Mimikyu. Even without the Guide Strats votes, it still came out squarely ahead in the unfair category with almost 2,000 to spare. It all comes down to this. Second place has been taken by Lucario. I wish I could call this close, but with a difference of over 40,000 votes, first place is easily taken by Greninja, earning its second victory here today. A special shout out to Dedenne, Chikorita, and Meowscarada, who all won first place in their own polls despite not even showing up in the top 10 of a single other event. And of course, bonus points to Dedenne and Chikorita for doing it in official polls. Of course, I'm not done here. These latest up-to-date websites, forums, and articles are all great for knowing who's the most popular right now, but what about the fan favorites of previous generations? Going back from here, all I have are official surveys and polls. Not that I had any desire to exclude unofficial ones, I just didn't find any. I'm sure they exist, but I've already wasted too much time making this video. Feel free to send any my way though, I'd be happy to take a look at them. Now, going backwards from where this video started, the next poll I'm going to discuss is the Pokemon General Election 720. It was named this because there were 720 Pokemon at the time, as this occurred in 2016. The poll was, if it's any surprise, only conducted in Japan. It was part of promotion for the Pokemon movie 19. That's Volcanion's movie for those of you that haven't been keeping track. Now, this election did have our usual suspects pretty close to the top, and Greninja, unsurprisingly, won first place. But there is a pretty significant reason that I decided to exclude it from the previous part of the video. The first place winner was going to be distributed as an event Pokemon. I think this explains pretty neatly why the top 10 list is stuffed full of legendaries, but ultimately the event Pokemon ended up being Greninja. This poll also famously had a second event Pokemon, Simisear, which was chosen because it came dead last. Also of interesting note, both of these Pokemon came with the Wishing Ribbon, rather than the more usual Event Ribbon or Classic Ribbon. This event seems to have been an expansion of the Movie 17 vote 2 years earlier in 2014. There were a few ways to vote. You could vote directly through the website, you could vote in the World Hobby Fair if you showed up in person. If you were watching the Pokemon XY anime through a TV Tokyo channel or TV Tokyo channel affiliate, you'd be able to vote by pressing the corresponding button on your remote control between 7 and 7:30 p.m. on specific dates. You could also go in person to vote at a Pokemon Center, or if you received the February issue of Korokoro magazine, you'd be able to submit your vote over mail. This vote was far more limited, as it was a choice only between 4 mythical Pokemon: Jirachi, Manaphy, Darkrai, and Victini. Darkrai won this contest, and was distributed alongside the purchase of a ticket for the upcoming movie. The next couple polls are all Generation 5 and derived from the Pokemon Global Link website. For the Pokemon Dream World, there was an event where you could vote from any of the Pokemon in the first 493, that's Generations 1 through 4, and the one that received the most votes would be distributed as an event. There were separate polls in Japan, Korea, the United States, and I believe Europe, though I'm not 100% certain. Since the website was almost entirely Flash-based and poorly archived, it's difficult to make out the specific details, and most of what I get is coming from secondary sources. But so far as I can tell, Arceus won all of the polls except for in Korea, where Rayquaza won instead. Another poll conducted around the same time was the Netkun popularity poll for the Pokemon Adventures manga, published by Shogakukan. 2 separate polls were done, one for Pokemon and one for humans, but it was more for individual Pokemon characters in the manga and not the Pokemon species as a whole. The winner was Red's Pikachu, with Mimi the Milotic and Mewtwo following suit. There were also little comments left by some of the voters, which I found really sweet. Despite looking as hard as I couldn't find any polling data taken during Generation 4, but during Generation 3 we got one just in time for Pokemon's 10th anniversary. I can't find where the poll was actually done, though I'd assume it was somewhere on Pokemon's official site. I tried searching through the archive as far back as I could, but fortunately I did find the results, with the top 20 all being event Pokemon made available during the tour across America. Though, I surmise like later event polls, this skewed the Pokemon made available, since everyone wants to vote for the Pokemon that they can get.
I was honestly kind of astonished that we were able to get this good of a picture from 2006, but here you can see the list of all of the Pokemon which won. I'm not entirely sure what the order is here, especially given that Latios and Latias are split, which makes me wonder if it's derived from the final ranking, but that's just speculation, so take that with a massive grain of salt. Also, while I was looking for pictures of this, I found that the one that they used for the Party of the Decade was different from the one that they used for the Journey Across America, and this reflects the fact that the Pikachu is actually different between the two events as well.
There's only one poll left for me to discuss, but first I just want to go into everything I tried in order to find Generation 1 and 2 popularity data. I read every Nintendo Power issue from the time, skimmed every Korokoro issue, watched as much news coverage as I could on Pokemania in the US and in Australia. I followed information on tournaments that took place at the time. I even tried looking at Hasbro's toy Graduation, which is their fancy word for retirement, to see if I could use that to figure out if they're retiring unpopular toys or out-of-stock toys, but the data seemed completely arbitrary. There's no world in which Bulbasaur is on one end of the spectrum and Mew's on the other. There was an official Pokemon Stadium Fantasy League that looked promising, but pretty much all the information on it is, as far as I could tell, lost forever. But I said that I found something. So what did I find? A Pokemon popularity poll that predates Generation 1, conducted internally by Game Freak themselves to see which Pokemon should make the cut and actually get in the game. This poll is actually referenced in Sun and Moon by a line of dialogue spoken by Game Freak's own Morimoto, but the actual original poll was made publicly available in the Satoshi Tajiri manga, and very helpfully translated by the fine folks at helixchamber.com. There were many of these polls conducted periodically during the game's development, but the one that we have ranks Executor in first place, Chansey in second, Clefairy in third, and so on from there. Now, having gone through all of these polls, there's one final question remaining. Why hasn't Zigzagoon made any of the top 10 lists? I even had 2 chances, both as... Obstagoon made the list!